Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
So now we can go around the room and introduce ourselves. And I'm Peter.
Lee.
Manuel. Roger.
Rod.
I'm Kay.
Bill.
John.
Paul.
George.
AKA Cass.
I'm Glenn.
Tatuan.
I'm Jerry. I'm Joe. I'm Richard Angelini.
Ed.
Harvey.
Doug.
I'm Brian. My name is Kate Julia.
I'm Larry Wish.
Larry.
I'm Ray Dyer.
My name is Tom Bruein.
I'm Shantan Pugan.
My name is John.
Jack.
Lee.
Andreas.
I'm Henry Rabinowitz.
My name is Tony Pasqua.
Martin.
My name is Bill.
My name is Gary Ost.
My name is Michael.
I'm John.
Oh, Jim. My name is Roy.
Is that everybody?
Daniel.
Our format then will be, we'll have the Dharma Duo. Before that, we ask if there are any people here for the first or second time to introduce yourselves. We have a half an hour social out after the Dharma talk, so everybody will try to make you feel welcome and say hello. And also usually after that, I believe people go to lunch around 12:30, so that's welcome to everybody. So is there anybody here for the first or second time that wants to say good morning?
I was here last week.
Welcome.
Bruein was the speaker last week.
Cool.
But I liked it a lot.
Nice to see you. Anybody else?
I'm John. This is my second week here. I was here last week. This is an amazing space, so I'm grateful that this exists in my neighborhood. Wow.
Yeah. Wow, that's right. I guess I go. Okay, I wish I had an opening line. The Dharma Duo program, the program committee came up with it some years ago to invite the wisdom of the sangha to emerge up here, and we invite people to tell their stories, what their truth is, how they've encountered Buddhism, what have been major influences, and we've had a wonderful history of it, but then it became very hard to schedule and people were reluctant to commit. So to restart it, I who had booked many people to do it had managed to avoid doing it myself, so I thought it was only fair that I submit myself to the exercise. And it's quite daunting, actually, to try and look at your life and reassess all the mythologies of dukkha that you may have enshrined, and to just come to terms with the full brute force of your experience. And so can't really do that in the time allotted, but I'll try and do some highlights. Major early influences for me is I come from a family of Presbyterian ministers. It was just, the church was the family business. My father, grandfather, and uncle were all very good at what they did, and they were very sincere, and they were consistent. And the congregations were very nice. If there are nice people in the congregation, the minister's kids get to know them. So it was a series of villages that were kind and supportive and generous. Ministers are terribly paid. They're supposed to embody an indifference to wealth, which was bitter for me as a boy, because all the towns we were in were rich, and everyone had boats, and but they were generous. So anyway, I had lots of nice people in my life. My father was I'm a junior, and I grew up in his shadow. He was a great man, and I have felt inadequate my whole life, in contrast to the range of his competence. He also had extraordinary gravitas. It was just, and I was sort of colorful. I'd come home from a movie and Dad said, "Jim, what was the theme?" And I said, "Dad, it was a thriller. There was no theme." But he was a very powerful psychopomp. So, when he led the congregation into silent prayer, whoosh, there was a big whoosh. And I always have to hold on to my seat because it was very powerful. And his preaching was strong. And I grew up in a home where we held hands and said prayer before every meal. So there was a lot of integration of spiritual practice and just life. And I had very beloved and kindly grandparents who just really, your parents, you see their clay feet, but your grandparents you can maintain on a pillar. And they were, to please my grandmother, she would just swoon and melt, and it was just the greatest joy in my life to give her foot massages and to hear her tell stories. And my grandfather was deaf in one ear, so he was a great listener because he read lips. And but it made all the rest of us really loud, so I come from a very loud family. So Grandpa can hear. Also during this, fairly sunny, also California was, incomparably beautiful. And I grew up in Newport Beach and the surf and the Back Bay, and it was just a boy's paradise. My parents were very busy. I was a responsible kid, so I had no restrictions, and it was a wonderland of opportunities to play in the sand and the cliffs and the Back Bay. And but I also sailed with a high school boy next door he didn't have any brothers, and I didn't have any brothers, and we hung out together, and I could bounce over the fence and into his bedroom very quickly. And when I was, I think, 6 or 7, I just bounced in, and he was emerging from his shower with a raging, glorious erection. And I just said, "This, what is this?" And we had 2 sexual encounters, which were not violated in any way, but it certainly got me started pleasuring myself. And but I did inhale a nimbus of shame and silence from him. So without comprehension, I knew I should not talk about this. But meanwhile, I became something of a missionary with other boys who were open. I don't think I was predatory, but if there was any curiosity, I would share what I knew. And that carried on, Now we moved to New York, to a rich, competitive New York suburb. And I had 2 boyfriends in the church that I had regular sex with, and that was great. And I seduced a teacher when I was 12, and that was curious, not very satisfying. But I had no idea about homosexuality. I just knew I should keep it silent. And I was a bookworm, and I was in a bookstore, and I read something about Jean Genet, who hung out with pimps, murderers, drug addicts, and homosexuals. And I didn't know what a homosexual was, so I went to another book and I looked it up. And if you've ever seen the Edvard Munch picture of the Scream, I was absolutely, speechless. And a huge burden showed up on my head because I was a very public kid. And it never occurred to me that if I was busted, that I would not be ruined and driven out of town. And at that point, my grandparents came and lived with us for 3 months because the church sent my folks on a trip around the world. And although we were raised with extremely liberal social justice, no bad dogma, Christian take, and there was no hell, I was very worried about my soul and my destiny, and asked my grandfather, how did God, choose who went to heaven? And he said, everyone goes. Unless you really don't want to, but, I wanted to. And I bless him for that, because it helped, but I still had enormous theological conflicts. There was lots of part about the Apostles' Creed that I was censoring, even as a boy. I said, no, that's not right. And that, but basically the whole issue of God, and I would set up tests, laying books against each other so that God could tip them over in the night to demonstrate his existence. And of course, that didn't happen. And I was having stomach aches and terrible headaches, and I finally just had to postpone the decision. And I could not conceive that my grandparents were wrong about something so important, because they were right about everything else. So I just I borrowed their faith. I just said, okay, I'm just going to leave this for now. And so, I completely locked up my homosexual behavior, got through high school successfully, and when I had a chance to go to college 3,000 miles away from the congregation's prying eyes, I did. And landed at Stanford in 1966, when it just was exploding with anti-war fervor and rock and roll bands and drugs and sex, and it was a very interesting place to be. Not fun. Those were very dark times. People think, the music, the 60s were wonderful. They weren't. They were terrible. The war was terrible. And right away I met the student body president, David Harris, who was the founder of the draft resistance movement, and we went to the movies together. And at the end of this trip, I thought, oh, God, I'm going to have to become a felon, and because of the draft. And that was a burden through my college years. But I went to Stanford had campuses in Europe, and I went to the French one, and a fraternity brother knew that another friend of his was going, and he got us together, and we had a joint, and he said, you two must be roommates. It's my call. You just have to defer to me. I know this is supposed to happen. So I said, okay. Well, of course we ended up in bed, and we had a torrid but unhappy relationship, and he started to have a nervous breakdown, and just got drifted farther out, and I felt like just a destructive influence, because he hadn't had any experience and I had this repertoire. And I always spent the night before my 20th birthday sitting on a bridge trying to get up the nerve to jump. And thankfully this little voice said, just wait till tomorrow, just wait till tomorrow. And the next day, one of the great girls in the group had gotten up early and fixed me a beautiful breakfast that she brought to me in bed. And then that night, friends took me out to dinner, and you look at photographs from this party, and you would never know that this kid had been sitting on a bridge the night before. So that was, an early Buddhist lesson that things change. They can just pivot. The next year back on campus, I couldn't get it up with girls anymore. From this, I had no concept to frame that someone could fall in love with a man. So I didn't know that that's what I had been doing. And he just spun out and had shock treatment, and it was not a happy romance at all. That year, though, I heard that the psych department had a hypnosis lab, and that just interested me. And I went and tried to get out of department credit, and they got back and said they were going to have a seminar for out of department kids to work with the grad students in this hypnosis laboratory. And we were hypnotized every week, and we're taught about it, and we did amazing inner explorations, one of which was to scoop up all the energy, all the stuff in our body and open our mouth. And the next thing you know, you're looking down at your body. And it was a very concrete experience of how the consciousness could be separate from the body. And I really took that, I made a mental note of that. And meanwhile, I always loved pot and discovered psychedelics at the end of that year. And I was prone to mystic union. There's a picture of me as a 3-year-old pot-bellied little kid with his bathing suit on a beach in Yosemite, with my shovel sort of dangling from my hands, and just agog at the beauty in Yosemite. And that used to always happen to me when I took acid. So that was an influence. And I told my parents that summer that instead of working, I wanted to write plays. That was going to be my future. I was going to write plays. And so I wrote a play and came back. And since I wasn't going to have to go to graduate school and be a professor because I was going to be a famous playwright, I just did what I wanted my senior year. And I got A's in everything I touched just because I was free of Stanford's hateful graduate students' bitterness. But then, the draft lottery came up. It was the first time that there was a lottery. I had, of course, a low number. And I started watching this. I spent a quarter writing a CO application to be a conscientious objector, which was very illuminating. And then my last quarter, there was this big Cambodia invasion and student unrest, and all the campuses were closed, and we were all in encounter groups and sit-ins, and that's how my college career ended. So I expected to go home and do alternate service as a conscientious objector, but I had a really bad draft board, and it was like my life spun around a Ginsberg. But before that, on one of these mystic trips, we would drive to the ocean and pace at night, and I felt a very strong cosmic beckoning. I just felt like, yes, I am here. Okay, I see you, you see me. I sort of made a vow to try and keep that perspective. And then I went home and basically went nuts in my parents' attic watching this legal nightmare unfold. It took 2.5 years. I was eventually sentenced to prison, and my father, they were very supportive but hysterical, because I had been a golden boy, and here I was a felon, and my father had an undiagnosed case of MS, which kept getting worse with every setback in my case, and the appeal was going to take a year, and I decided I was terribly afraid of getting raped in prison, and when I finally came to terms that was what was limiting my options, I called my lawyer, who was a great man, and said, I'm not going to appeal. I'm just going to go in and serve my sentence and hopefully get out alive. And he said, no, you're not. I said, am I? He said, no. I'm your lawyer. This is my decision. And I said, but Fred, he said, you've been absolutely manhandled by no one has ever seen anything like what you've gone through. And my judge kept postponing the verdict for 9 months, which was unprecedented. He said, we have a chance of a great precedent. And it's just, so he got an earlier appeal date. And somehow I see that willingness to surrender my fear, or at least not let it rule me, everything changed. I met a woman who gave me a job. She had friends going to Africa for 3 months. I got a lavish apartment on Park Avenue. Then I got there was an early appeal date. I got a call from the lawyer's secretary said, "You won your case." And I said, "Okay, what does this mean?" She says, "It means you're free to go." I said, "What does that mean?" She says, "Cookie, it's gone poof. It doesn't exist anymore." And I said, "Poof?" She said, "Poof." Well, it's not so easy. It doesn't just go, but legally it did go poof. And later I found out that friends had studied, used the precedent in law school and used it in their legal careers. But during that time waiting with all these postponements, I thought, I'll give myself a career in reality, so insouciant. And so I read Carl Jung and William James and Doris Lessing and Flannery O'Connor, and I just was getting fed. I also was introduced to the I Ching and to yoga, and which both saved my life and it got me going. The yoga book was written by a priest who had learned yoga before he had gone to Africa for his missionary work, and he said he would have gone crazy if he hadn't done yoga. But for him, yoga was preparation for meditation. So I was a good student, so I did what I was doing. So I meditated. I was also getting stoned regularly and hypnotizing myself. So I would get really out there. I was like a Jane Bronte, the madman and the bat and the belfry and the minister's man's. And I started doing pranayama, this systematic breathing, and had some amazingly eruptive experiences, one sexual and another time it just, I was meditating and it knocked me across the room. There was a bolt up my spine and I hit my head against the wall. It was so powerful. I thought, whoa, what is going on here? And but anyway, in that dark time, I was writing a play. I was caring for my senile grandmother. My parents' marriage was shaky because my dad was way ahead of his congregation in terms of being opposed to the Vietnam War. And all of them are interesting. In Scarsdale, there was a clergy club of rabbis, priests, and ministers who were all in trouble with their congregations because of their being opposed to the war. And they counseled each other and they prayed with each other, which I always thought was a wonderful image of ecumenism. My father had always been very clear that, the Holy Spirit was busy everywhere, worldwide all the time. The truth is being exposed. And I took that literally. And since my sexuality just made it impossible to stay in the family business, which I had long known, But I did have a gift of faith. I always had a faith, and everyone in the family sort of had it. And so from that time, I had a routine of doing yoga and meditating and throwing the I Ching. And the I Ching was, it's a Taoist mirror. You throw these coins and you get a mirror. And it has been an astonishment for the past 40 years to meet the companionship of that commentary. Sometimes it's very murky, but it's generally a reflection of my murkiness. So I had, worked in the anti-war and human rights movement in New York, and then at a backpacking trip in Wyoming, I just couldn't conjure Manhattan. The beauty was so overwhelming after 8 days out on the trail. And I went back with a resolution to move back to California to be around more beauty. And I walked away from a career in the human rights movement that I have regretted at times, but I thought I knew my future at the right place. Anyway, so I moved through the gay world. I liked women, and there was no support for bisexual experience in the politics of 1975 San Francisco, where the gay party was in full swing, which I enjoyed, but there was a lot I just didn't find very interesting, and so I got an apartment in the outer Richmond where nothing ever happens on the street. Nothing, I can guarantee. And I would dip into the gay world for sex. And occasionally, and some, I know I heard Alan Watts on the radio in college, and that was, I think, my first real hit on Buddhism. But once driving home from a wonderful party, I was passing through Soma, and I thought, oh, I'll go to the bathhouse. And I thought, oh, a little doubt about that. And I got this idea. They're all Buddha. Everyone is a Buddha. So that allowed me to go, and I had a wonderful time. But ominously, once in a trip to the bathhouse, I think in the early 80s, I had just put on my towel and was starting my stroll, and I heard a loud voice say, "Turn around, put your clothes on, and never come back. This is a death trap." And I thought, oh my God, of course, people are smoking cigarettes and getting stoned in these little rooms, and there's a fire trap. And so I never went back. And I had boyfriends, but I did not have an imagination for long gay relationships. Didn't. But then the AIDS crisis, clobbered us, my beloved cousin, and my best friend went down fast. And then my father died of lung cancer, and I had been my family's massage slave. My grandmothers loved their feet done, and so it was something I knew how to do. So I did that for my cousin and my friend Steve, and then with my father, when he died of lung cancer, it attenuated the anxiety of being short of oxygen, and I just sort of rode him for this last week. And so I had 3 clear experiences that touch and massage. It didn't save anyone, which I had tried to save them all, of course, but it could make them feel better. So I studied a lot of bodywork traditions and got work in a shanty residence where they were putting together guys who had lost their homes. And as a program, mostly it didn't work because guys were sick and didn't want to have to take care of other guys who were sick. But one of the 2 houses I worked in, they comprehended that this was their last family. And it was a joyful place. And of course, they all died. But once, and I went through the earthquake with them in a house that jumped off this foundation, that I was in this very serene place with one of my guys there, and we had a healing tape on and music, and then, the windows are falling out, and the mantle was coming, the walls were coming, and we just stayed in this little place, and I saw the chandelier swinging. I said, oh, time to get up, and I got him up. It was so I had this great attachment to these guys, and I later wrote a play about them, which I could not finish because I could not kill them off. But during that time, once I went to the bathroom to clean up after, they were all pretty sick, and they had their, conditions to be aware of. And I looked at my face, and I was scarlet, sort of like Larry's shirt. I just was bright red. I wasn't tired. I wasn't sweating. They were all fine. And I thought, what in Sam Hill is the energy transaction going on here? What is happening here? And it was also with them that I although we had been forbidden at Stanford to use our hypnotic techniques on anyone, of course, we would go back and get stoned, and I'd hypnotize everyone. So that was, but I hadn't used it for anyone else for a long time. So I started using it with these guys who very much appreciated, as they were confronting their death, an experience of their consciousness being separate from their bodies. But also this energy thing. So soon after that, I got invited to go in the first group to study Qigong in China, which is sort of working with the body's energies. It would just amaze me. Here were people with 7 and 8 different conditions wrong, and they were still growing their fingernails. They were still healing wounds. I mean, the body was just a miracle of the body overwhelmed me. So in China, I got to work with these wonderful Chinese physicians who they would diagnose you like this. They would put their hand over your head and read your body through their own body. so they would feel what you were feeling. And it was, so that whole tradition was illuminated, and but also at the end of which they said this has been a two-way street. They were so appalled at our questions, because in Chinese pedagogy you don't ask questions. You just say, yes, you understand. You don't take notes, you see. And we were saying, go back. And way too long. More later. I love this group. I discovered, as I said, the gay world I didn't get the community aspect, but through the AIDS thing, I discovered a group called Gay Men's Spiritual Retreat, and I finally found my men who were stepping up to their spiritual impulses, and that might be the gift of gay men. It finally I finally went into place. I think this is a planetary organization. I think that the merging of experiences with the Buddhist traditions of inwardness is going to have untold fruit, and I think we are unbelievably blessed. I think you're all gorgeous. I sometimes I feel like an imposter because everyone says, there's no God in Buddhism. Well, there's a God in my heart, and so that's what I commune with when I meditate. And I think that's what people encounter, but I think how we understand it affects our experience personally. Anyway, I leave it with that. Thank you very much. Sarah Cuttertree.
Good morning. I had been asked about 3 years ago to do a Dharma Duo. And at the time I turned it down because when I was thinking about it, I respectfully turned it down because I was thinking about that and I thought, I can't do a Dharma Duo. I'm not Buddhist enough. And 3 years later, I'm sitting before you now doing a Dharma Duo, and I realize that it's not about being Buddhist or being Buddhist enough. It's really about being, and about being present. And I thought, I could do that. So here I am. So thank you in advance for hearing my talk, which actually my story begins here in San Francisco. I was born and raised in the city. My mom and dad are from Peru. And I want to mention just quickly, because I get this question often, how does a guy that looks like you have the name Roy King and you speak Spanish and all? And my dad's father was from the United States, and his mom was born in Peru like my dad, but her background was of English and Swedish descent. They came from Europe. But my mom was the Latina. She was half Spanish, half Andean, and so hence the look, but the name. So Howard and Victoria came to San Francisco, thank God, of all places. My dad had some family in Monterey, and so they settled here in the city. And being, of South American descent, we were raised Catholic. My mom was Catholic, but the twist in our home was that my father was an atheist, which made for some really interesting dinner time conversation. He was very respectful, though, when we were kids. When we were children going through the sacraments in grade school and all, he never intervened. He never said anything derogatory about the church or put his beliefs on us. But what he did do as I got older, which I really appreciate now, especially when I think back, and I have to tell you, this has been an amazing experience to put this part of my life together. I've been having the most vivid dreams, and a lot of just things have been coming up. It's been great. It's been a little scary too. I must say too, during the meditation, my heart started to pound so hard, and then I opened up my eyes and I looked at everybody here, and then that brought me a sense of peace. So, which says a lot about the space. But he would always say to me, son, don't believe everything you hear or everything they tell you. Educate yourself, learn, read. And my dad was very left brain. He was very much more a scientist. He loved astronomy, the study of the oceans, and all of that stuff. And so he wanted me to really get some vast education that way. But I'm more right brain. I'm more intuitive. I'm more into art, more into color. And so I never really followed his path, but what I did was I took his advice, and I did learn, and I did read, and I did study. But mine was always fueled by what was going on inside of me and by my own process, and always trying to get in contact or in touch with the God of my heart, which was not wrapped in dogma. It was wrapped up more in what I felt was a more loving being, and that I came from a more loving place instead of a judgmental place. But if I was a product of Howard and Victoria's home, I was also a product of the bigger picture, which to me was also, or one big picture aspect of it was San Francisco. And I got to tell you, I know that during that time it was tough for you, but you're a little older. I was like 5 or 6 years old going through like the 60s, and I loved it. And for me, San Francisco was just an amazing place to grow up. And my mom and dad were very much the tourists. We grew up as tourists in our own city. Every weekend we would do all the things that people come to San Francisco to do. And I loved it. And I can remember, like, he would say during a family outing, this one I clearly remember, he would go, "Hey, son, you want to go to Haight-Ashbury?" Haight-Ashbury, not the hate. Haight-Ashbury. He said, "You want to go to Haight-Ashbury and see the hippies?" I'd be like, "Yeah." Like, I thought that was so cool. I thought that was the coolest. It was a mixture of fear and excitement because the hippie chicks were always really cool and fun and whimsical and light. The guys were a little scary with the big beards and the long hair and the wild eyes, which some of them had, because I didn't know back then, but they were tripping on acid or whatever they were doing. So I always locked the door and rolled up the window, but I still enjoyed seeing what I saw.
I saw you drive by.
Hey! I can also remember back in the day, you could drive down Columbus and make a left turn onto Broadway, and there was a freeway at the end of Broadway that wrapped around the Ferry Building, and you could almost touch it. It was so close. But before you got on the freeway, there was a business of some kind that had a glass cubicle on top of a pole that a girl would climb up, slip into, close the door. It would be kind of lit up. She'd go dance to the radio station that my dad would be playing or whatever.
K90s.
Oh, we have to talk. Because we have to talk. Anyway, and we always loved driving by the girl. I thought it was so cool. And I must say, I know that the quintessential song of San Francisco for most people, or a lot of people, is Tony Bennett's I Left My Heart in San Francisco. I get it. It's a beautiful song. But for me, it will forever be Scott McKenzie's San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair. I love that song. And so, I learned, I was lucky because I grew up in 2 neighborhoods. My mom still lives in the house that I grew up from the time I was 4, to the home that she still has now near City College, but they moved from the Mission on Albion Street between 15th and 16th. And my uncle moved into the home that they rented there before they bought their house. And so he and my cousins were living there. So on weekends, I got to go and hang out and sort of have 2 neighborhoods to grow up in. So my experience of growing up in San Francisco has been very diverse, and I know every neighborhood, I feel, because that's how we were raised. Whereas I speak to other natives, and they don't know, some of them, I'm surprised when they've never heard about the girl in the cube, they've never gone to different places, they only stayed in their own neighborhood. Because of my mom and dad, we really got a diverse, view of the city. And I really appreciate that. So there's also, whimsical and fun memories of the city, but there's also some very difficult ones that San Francisco taught me. And of course, I remember being in high school and listening over the PA that our mayor, George Moscone, and Harvey Milk had been slain that day. And I didn't know too much about Harvey back then, but I sure really loved our mayor. I wasn't into politics. I was still too young, didn't really care. It wasn't that big a deal, but he just seemed like a really great guy. And my sister went to school with somebody who was part of his family, so there was a deep connection. So at the time, the only real thing that I could even equate that with was, the slaying of Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King. So it was a really tough time, and I remember Jonestown happened right around that time as well.
A week before.
A week before, right? And then a few years later, of course, what changed all of our lives, AIDS happened in the city. And so it was a really, really tough time growing up and coming out as a gay man and getting out there, and it was scary. But throughout that whole experience and through growing up, I always had a real deep-rooted sense of my spirituality and something that always drove me and was always very underlying. If I didn't tap into it all the time, I was perhaps too young, but it was always there. And it was never steeped in dogma. It was not about Catholicism. It was just about this connection that I had to this higher power, which I really hadn't completely discovered in myself, but I knew was always there for me. And so what I did during the AIDS crisis was I turned to what I knew, which was Catholicism. And so back then and then 10 years ago, I joined and then rejoined Most Holy Redeemer, which is, I always call it the gay Catholic Church, but it's the gay parish in the Castro. And I met a man during a retreat, very wonderful man named Patrick, who was starting homeless. He was starting one night a week homeless suppers. And they became known as the Wednesday night suppers. And he asked me, he knew of my catering and restaurant background and asked me to come and cook for him. So I thought, sure. And before you know it, we started out with 15, 20, 25 dinners. It turned into I think the ceiling was either 125 or 150 every Wednesday. And he loved me because I'd do anything. I mean, he'd come to me and go, do you think you can do quesadillas for 150? I'm like, sure, and so I never said no. And I thought, we're here for a good cause. Go for it. Why not? And I actually learned a lot about cooking and stuff then. It was fun. And then the church scandal happened. And then, of course, who got blamed? Who were the scapegoats? We were. Those gay men and the whole scandal and everything that happened with Archbishop Law and if the foundation isn't strong, the house isn't going to stay up. And so my foundation with my Catholicism really wasn't strong enough to keep me there. But what really caught my attention, and as I think back on this story now, is the feeling and the sense of community. And that's really, it wasn't about a crucifix, it wasn't about the story of a man, it was really more the sense of people that came together to honor the people that we were either serving or the people that we were in church with. So I left, and it began a few years of a journey of searching other spiritual paths. I joined the Integral Yoga Institute on Dolores Street. Had a few wonderful years there, learned a lot about Hinduism. I studied the Bhagavad Gita. I studied the Sutras of Patanjali. I learned about Sri Satchidananda, who was the man who brought the Integral Yoga Institute to San Francisco and to the United States. And one of the coolest things was there's a picture of him there that is taken from behind him, and he's up on a rise, and he's in front of thousands of people. And I read the caption, and he was actually the opening speaker at Woodstock. So with my hippie background, I was like, oh my God, he's so cool. So I really dug being there for a while and learning, but again, I started moving out of there as well, and I kept searching. I was looking for something, and I wasn't really sure what that was. And then, as we've heard here, Dharma speakers come and talk about sometimes tragedy or something difficult that comes into your life that illuminates another path. And that for me happened 4.5 years ago. My best friend and the big brother that I never had, Randy, died after a battle of an illness that he had, and it came back. It was in remission for a few years, and then it came back full bore, and it took his life in March of 2006. So when he died, two things came to my mind. One was, you're going to be going through a really harsh, dark tunnel now. I was very devastated. The loss was extreme for me. But I never lost sight at the little light at the end of the tunnel. It might have been the size of a pinhead, but I never lost sight of it. I knew that when I got through it, that I would be a stronger person and hopefully a better person at that. The other thing that I knew was I needed community. I was looking for a community. And I had remembered this place because I had been here before. And I thought something was compelling me to come here. I didn't remember the name of it. I knew that they mentioned something that starts with an S, which was sangha, and a few things, because I hadn't really dabbled as much in Buddhism in the time that I was, traveling around and doing other things. So I came here. And I remember the first day I walked in, I could remember, take a deep breath. I was very nervous. I was also very sad, but I didn't want to show it. So I walked through the doors, and as I made my way over, a rather distinguished, handsome fellow with white hair and a white beard was standing a few feet away from me, and a conversation kind of came up that went something like this. Hello, how are you? Fine. Is this your first time here? Well, I've been here before, but it's been a while. Oh, okay, and what's your name? My name is Roy. Oh, welcome, Roy. I'm Ray Dyer. And that's the first time I met my friend Ray. He's heard the story before, but I think it bears repeating because he taught me something very valuable that day. This didn't happen when I was thinking about stuff. To welcome someone that you don't know and to be kind to them is huge. And so I actually facilitate here once a month. And so some of you have been very kind to me and thanked me for the day or whatever, and you bring up that, we really like the way you include the new people and the way you remember their names. And I learned that from Ray, because you never know who's walking through those doors. You never know where they are in their life and what a smile and a welcome brings to someone in their life. And so, and every week I would come and I'd be like, God, I hope Ray's there. And there he was. He was always there. And he was like an impetus. He was like a beacon for me in a real dark place, a beacon of light. So I would come in, then it got to not just hello, a big hug. He gives great hugs. And that started my journey here with the GBF. And for the first couple of years, I was doing other things. I had joined a hiking club. I was meeting other friends, making new acquaintances and all. But it wasn't until 2008 in September that I went to my first hike. My first retreat. And I met my friend Michael, who was our retreat guy. And I had an opportunity to spend time with a lot of you. And that's what really began my true journey here. And when I came back from that, my life changed because I became much more, I felt a greater involvement in the Sangha. I got to meet wonderful people, like this gentleman here, who was also always very kind when I first came here. And the experience of now being in community. And when we hear that saying, ask and you shall receive. And I truly believe that when the intention is from the heart and it's true, that the universe provides. And so this was what I had asked for. I had hoped to make it through the tunnel, which I did, and I hoped to have a wonderful community, which I do have. And I must say, for those of you who are new and who have been here maybe once or twice, or those of you who have been here longer than me, this place is a really special place. And we should be very grateful that we have this in our lives. And I'm very, very grateful to be here. And I know about impermanence. I know that you never know how long things may last. But I must say I feel very honored and very privileged to be here today. And thank you for today.
Hopefully you'll both be in this social half hour so we can talk a little bit more. Do we have any announcements?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Michael Murphy. I've been coordinating the GBF retreat. This is my 4th year, and I've never had to announce this before, but we're full, which is exciting and kind of, I'm a little saddened at the same time. But if there's anybody here who really has their heart set on being there and they haven't registered, see me and we'll see what we can work out. The nature of the retreat is such that beyond a certain threshold, there really would be a loss of intimacy, and some of the processes we do would just take too long. And also the space there only accommodates, the dining area and the meditation hall only accommodates a certain number of people. So anyway, I'm excited that there's this kind of momentum for the retreat, but we're also sort of at this threshold with there being more interest than we can make space for. So do talk to me if you had your heart set on coming, and we'll see what we can work out. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jerry Jones. I'm in the program committee, and thanks to Jim and Roy today. We've been at Dharma Duo in probably over a year, so thank you for your courage and your heart and your great stories. Next week, we're going to have, our speaker is going to be Neil Grungrass. He's the founder and executive director of the Organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration. And they help a lot of LGBT refugees. So, next week.
Do we have a host today?
Yes. Hi, my name is Tage, and I'm the host. And if I knew I was going to be moved so much today, I would have baked a cake. I would have, thank you. Instead, there's some sweets and some grapes, and there's also tea, if you'd like. Please wash, dry, and return your cup to the rack. I'm going to be going around with the Dharma Duo. Suggested donation is $5 to $8. More if you're able. There's a newcomer sign-up sheet on the credenza. Please write down your address and email on that. And
Clearly, please.
What's it?
Clearly.
Yeah.
Legibly.
Oh, clearly, yeah. And then, like Peter said, that goes out from lunch after the meeting. Folks gather at the door at 12:30.
Anybody else? We close with a dedication of merit. Asking you to do it for us.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.